Colleagues, councillors, welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting in Croydon. Can I suggest that we make a start this evening by all standing and show a minute's silence with respect to the events in Paris on Saturday. Thank you very much for that. If we could begin the formal meeting now then. So Part A minutes, we happy with those? Thank you. Apologies for absence. Jim?
Leader, I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Dudley Mead and Councillor Margaret Mead.
Thank you very much. Disclosure of interest, I'll assume that they are as members of related to them. Councillor Pollard.
Can we add to that Councillors Jason Perry and Maria Gatlin, please?
Yep, we can, yes.
And Phil Thomas, sorry.
Thank you very much. Disclosure of interest, I'll assume they are as in the members' register and as otherwise advised. Urgent business, there isn't any. Can we agree the split A and B? Thank you very much indeed. That takes us on to agenda item 6, the Croydon Opportunity Fairness Commission Interim Report. I'm very, very pleased that we've got the Bishop of Croydon with us tonight and the chair of the Commission, Jonathan, who is going to lead us through a presentation. But if I could just, I think, reflect before we hear from the Bishop. You know, there was some discussion around, you know, should we be doing a Fairness Commission, and what was that looking at? Well, if that seemed a relevant idea, if you like, when we originally set out on this journey, in a world we now inherit with dramatically and rapidly further changes to how local government's funded, to public sector cuts and austerity. You know, we've seen news in recent weeks about CALAT funding, which is a direct funding from government, and others. Then how we work together better across the public-private sector, how we share information as communities, and how we work in increasing partnership with Croydon's voluntary sector, amongst many other issues, seem more important to me today than ever. So very much welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Very good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. Great to have the chance to give you some sort of update on where we're up to with the Opportunity and Fairness Commission, and to invite you further into the discussion so that when we get to the end point, end of January, we've got something which we will be genuinely able to hand over, knowing that it will reflect the feelings of people of Croydon at every level and across the borough, and become something that we can really do something with as we go forward. When I was asked a while ago about what it had been like being chair of the Commission, I said if I'd known how much work it was going to involve, I'd still have done it like a shot, but I might have cancelled some other things first. It has been a huge amount of work, but that's because Croydon is a place with a huge amount of stuff happening, with a huge amount of potential, and with a huge amount of need. And to try and bring some of that together, to bring a fresh perspective, to bring some ideas for new solutions, has been an incredibly large amount of work. And I do want to pay tribute to the campaign company for the support they've given us, and to my fellow commissioners who've really worked hard trying to get some of the things up to the point we have them now. We all see the change in the landscape of Croydon that's happening. We've got the transformation happening in the town centre, all the changes of use in those various office blocks into flats. And there is a change in the atmosphere as well, much of it very positive. There is, I think, a wave that we can get onto at this point to try and change the story about Croydon. And I'm going to talk about some of the specific things we've identified, but I think overarching that is an opportunity here, and I hope the Commission will be a significant part of it, to have a better story of a Croydon which is looking towards the future and is a place that people want to be part of. Want to be part of for living, want to be part of for working, want to be part of for their entertainment life, is a place that no longer has as its main selling point that you can get out of it easily, but somewhere people actually want to come to. We've done quite a lot of listening to people, we've done quite a lot of talking. I just want to give you a little bit about our approach and how we've gone about things over the last few months, and then I'll talk a little bit about the interim conclusions that we came to. As we all know, we're working against the backdrop of a rapidly declining public purse, particularly for local government, and we're also working against the backdrop of the other pressures that are hitting us, particularly in Croydon. Hugely rising house prices and the demographic pressures that puts on us, homelessness issues, the issues of managing the diversity of our borough, and of the fact that the north of the borough is very different from the south, and very difficult sometimes for people to feel a sense of relationship in either direction. It would have been quite easy as a Commission just to list all the things that needed sorting out and then present them to someone and say, sort that out. But we tried to look instead for those areas where we could see things which we could build on, alliances which we could bring together, people who were already doing things who needed to talk to each other more, resources that we already had, and things where we could actually together make a difference from within the borough for the borough. So we've not focused on things which are about national policy or international pressures. We've tried to focus on the things that are actually here. Because there's a huge amount of resource here, huge amount of goodwill and energy and enthusiasm, much of it heading off in different directions. And I think there's an opportunity to bring things together which have tended to be rather separate and disparate. So we're not trying to second guess the council or anybody else within the borough. One of my images for this is that we're trying to make the jigsaw a bit better, to find some of the bits that might be missing, to bring things together maybe in a slightly different configuration. So it's not that it's going to be lots of things that people don't know already, but maybe we're helping to see how they can fit together better and things that can work together better. What I hope we can do is to help people to be more creative, to take more responsibility for their own lives and their communities. Hope we can identify some of the assets that are out of sync with each other, propose things like a commissioning framework which can use better the resources of statutory and voluntary agencies working together, look at some of the things which are currently absent and how we can overcome them. One of the quotations we had from someone in New Addington was, if you could bottle the community spirit in New Addington and export it, you'd make millions, which would be great. Not quite sure how we would exactly do that, but maybe what we can do is to understand some of what makes the community spirit in New Addington so powerful, despite the fact that it is also at the bottom of our deprivation tables, including Field Day, of course, and see how that could help communities across the borough to work better together. So one of our key aims has been to be creating coalitions between people, sometimes who don't necessarily think of working together, coalitions sometimes between people who might think of each other as competitors, but to say how can we have a shared vision for the future of Croydon which is one of open opportunity and one which is fair. It was very interesting when we started asking people what they thought fairness was about. Most people in Croydon, as a general consensus, regard fairness as being about opportunity. The two interrelate intimately. Actually, calling it an Opportunity and Fairness Commission, I think, was an act of good perception among whoever made that decision, because the two intersect for the people of Croydon. People are not generally so worried about whether you end up richer or poorer. They are worried about whether you don't have the same chances to end up rich or poor. They are worried about the fact that where you're born makes a huge difference to your life expectancy. They are worried about the fact that if you're born in Fieldway, you're scarcely likely to go to university, whereas if you're born in Sanderstead, you probably will. So our interpretation of fairness has been largely around what gives people a fair start and then gives people fair chances through their life so that they can take the opportunities that are offered to them if they have the open field to do so. So, since January, we've spoken to about 3,000 residents, which probably doesn't sound all that much when we have a population of, well, 380,000 approximately, something like that, well, officially anyway, but is actually more than any other commission has managed to do. Engaged with about 100 organisations, attended 25 events. We've heard lots of stories. We've heard some really positive things as well as some really negative things. We've heard people saying, what do you want, what do you think of Croydon? Unspeakable word I'm not allowed to say in public. And then other people going to the Croydon Till I Die event and saying, yeah, we want to be Croydon. And both of those are very much there. They're real parts of the story of the borough. There is both optimism and there is pessimism, and it's all mixed in together, sometimes in the same person. And that's one of the reasons why telling a different story about Croydon is such an important part of what we can do. Because if people have a sense of a positive story, then that will start to create some of the things that we want to see happen. We have people who are aspirational already. We have people who are looking to build up and go forward in their lives. Many of them are seeing themselves doing that outside Croydon. Part of our job, I think, is to enable people to see their future within the borough and for the borough, rather than to seeing it necessarily as a stepping stone. But we ought to also use those people who are here for a little while and say, all right, while you're here, don't just think of it as somewhere you come and sleep, but as somewhere where you contribute, somewhere where you play, somewhere where you work, somewhere where you're part of the scene. But that story of Croydon won't have any traction unless there's specific concrete stuff happening underneath it. And that's what we were trying to get to when we set up the 6 work streams we had. And when we set them up, we had to be very ruthless about thinking, all right, firstly, which work streams do we take? Because there's so many things you could do. And then also, what are the priorities going to be within that? So we're trying, as I said, to look for things where we felt that from within the borough we could make a difference to the borough. We were also looking for things where we felt there wasn't already a huge head of steam behind it. So, for instance, it would have been, in a sense, obvious to talk about domestic violence, but we felt that there was already such a lot of work going on in that and such a recognition of it as an issue that it wasn't something where we needed to add anything more because it was already being dealt with and really well taken forward. So we were trying to look for things where we could really add something rather than just cheering on something that was already happening. So the first of our priorities is around building vibrant, responsible and connected communities. And that was partly about recognising the diversity of the borough and the fact that people feel their sense of identity often more within Purley or South Norwood or wherever than they do with Croydon as a whole. And rather than regarding that as a problem that we need to sort of try and sweep away, say, how could we enable people to feel that being part of their local neighbourhood is part of being part of the borough, and that the two feed each other and resource each other. So we're trying to suggest ways in which we can open the door for local neighbourhoods, businesses and residents together to begin to take power within their local neighbourhood, to do things for their local neighbourhood, to build on some of the things that are already happening. So we've had some interesting conversations about how bids might be part of that process, but also looking at the ways in which local councillors already have been given local budgets and how that might feed in, other local initiatives happening, to see how we can open the way for people in local communities to take power. But that isn't something which from the top you can dictate, because that would negate the whole idea. So it has to be something in which we raise up the possibility. The second one, and I'm going to zip through quite quickly, is for the town centre not to be redeveloped into a little bubble, or rather large bubble, but actually to be somewhere that lifts the whole borough. To be somewhere that people can identify with and say, yeah, I'm proud to be part of Croydon, and that's part of that is because this is a place I like to come to. One of the constant refrains I met as I was first in the borough, going around talking to people, was, oh yeah, I used to shop in Croydon. And I'd like to take the past tense out of that. But I'd like to take out also, not just the shop, but for Croydon to be a place where people come for all sorts of things. So to develop the cultural offer, to develop the restaurant offer, to develop also the work offer. So we want to see the town centre becoming a place which people can identify with as something that they're proud of. The third one was around children. To ensure no child is left behind was the phrase. It's a phrase used very much, and we want to work together in order to find what it would mean in order to enable children to be in Croydon entering school not statistically generally behind the curve as against other London boroughs. How we can support the early interventions which will enable children to have that early development. I've just had a meeting with other faith leaders from across the borough. We've had a really interesting conversation about how within faith communities we could potentially work on helping people to understand what parenting means, particularly people who've come from other cultures and continents and have their model of parenting is based on a very different cultural setting. So how could we, say, right, so how are you going to parent your children to be able to engage with Croydon in the 21st century rather than, where you were brought up? And how do those two mesh together in a way that brings your strength and resources of your tradition, but also recognises the current challenges that we're part of? So, no child left behind. We're very keen to establish a wider range of role models. We're aware that in this borough there are not as many people from ethnic minority groups in senior leadership roles as there should be. And we want to find ways in which people can have a sense that, yes, I could do that by seeing those who have and do. Fourth one is around the homelessness issue. Housing, of course, is an issue in many different ways. Affordability is another one. We wanted to focus particularly on homelessness, the number of families in temporary accommodation, very high, as you know, in this borough. The number of people homeless. The statistics are difficult to get at, but Night Watch estimates about 60 people sleeping rough each night. We have some particular proposals around how we could move forward on making sure homes can be found for all. Supporting residents towards better times. We're very glad that the council didn't need any persuading to become a living wage employer and has now become registered as such. But there aren't very many in the borough. And we want to try and encourage and infuse employers to be taking on that challenge, recognising that it's good for them and is actually going to, leads to a more motivated, better staying workforce and better productivity. We want to encourage the creativity and willingness to improvise. One of the things that's going to be necessary for people in Croydon, if they're going to continue to afford to live in Croydon, is for them to be able to be in those better paid jobs that you're going to need to have to afford the housing. So rather than it becoming a situation in which people who live here have to move out and other better paid people move in, let's see if we can create the work opportunities so that people in Croydon can move up the pay ladder and find themselves still able to be part of the community even as housing gets more expensive. The sixth is a connected borough where no one is isolated. And this was something which we realised was a common factor across the whole borough for different reasons and different sorts of people often, but there are very many people across the whole borough, north and south, who live lives of isolation. And that obviously has bad effects for them personally. It also means added demand on health services, other community services. It means people get sick quicker, stay in hospital longer and get ill again quicker. And there's a huge potential there for working together, particularly with voluntary local community groups, church groups again, and other faith communities, to enable people to find the scope for supporting each other. So that's a very quick tour through some of the key items. I hope you've seen the interim report either in hard copy or on the web or both. We were, of course, criticised for not having come up with concrete policy proposals, but that was, of course, entirely the point. The point was to produce an interim report which said, these are the headline issues as we see them. This is the directions we see things developing. We now want to work together with all the partners, obviously the council, other statutory agencies, voluntary and community groups and the business sector, to come up with some concrete, specific conclusions which we can then present at the end of January, so that when we come to the end of our process, we've then got something which can obviously then lead into implementation. Some of them will be more worked up than others, but the idea is that over the next few months we're in conversation with all the different partners across the borough to have something at the end of January that we can all be proud of and say, this is part of a process that continues and grows. And I've probably spoken longer than I should have, so I'll stop now.
Thank you so much for that fantastic tour through the draft proposals. I'm reminded that in our political manifesto last year, very much at the heart of that, we had ensuring that as many people, that everybody in Croydon actually gets the opportunity to potentially benefit from the economic growth and changes that are coming. But I'm equally reminded, which I think in terms of your jigsaw analogy is very useful indeed, that we are at times looking at more, at least two Croydon. So we, huge investment, exciting plans, whether it's Box Park, Fairfield, companies coming to invest here. But we also, there's 18,000 families in this borough that if George Osborne's tax credit changes go through, will be driven into further poverty. And as you said, around housing and homelessness, one of the prices of success, if we're not careful, is as we see growth. And if you own a home, well, okay, it's maybe good news if the house price has gone up, but for others, it's increasingly unaffordable. So how do we make sure that everyone shares that success? And part of that for us has very much been ensuring, which I think your report touches on as well, that what do we do to make sure we have a very strong private rented sector, for example, as a vibrant, realistic option, not as somewhere that people see as a last choice. I could comment lots, but I'm going to open it up to others, because I think there's fantastic stuff in here. The social isolation piece and the isolation, I can't say we planned it completely, but the Go On Croydon piece that follows in the agenda and the work that we were doing in terms of how do we, in terms of technology, connect the 80,000 people in this borough into that network, literally, that aren't at the moment, is another piece of work as well. But I'll open the floor up. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Jonathan and the Commissioners for a good piece of work. I think the interim report is excellent, and I think, I think the Commission spoke to more people than any other Fairness Commission has done. So we actually got out there and listened to many of our residents. So I think getting that voice from local people about what they wanted to see, I think, has been a very important part of that. I'd like to underline it is an interim report. There are people have the opportunity to feed back into it, and it's, people say, well, actually, it should say this. Well, feed that back into the report. It's time that to put that into the report. And then finally, on the social isolation, and I'll come a little bit. It's interesting, actually. We have the Go On report next, and then the welfare reform changes after that. So there's two parts of that, I think, that come out of the Fairness Commission meeting. It is really that social isolation. How do we, reach those people that are social isolated at the moment? Because it does affect their health, and we know that it's as dangerous to people as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, it is definitely a health issue as well as a social issue that we need to address. And then, of course, the welfare reform changes, which will have a real impact on our residents. Of course, some of our residents will have to move out of the borough because of those changes. And I think that's not what we want to see. We want to see an inclusive borough for all of our residents to be able to go here. We don't want a two-tier borough. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Louisa Woodley.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Bishop, and thank all the other commissioners for their hard work. It's a fantastic report. I know that Councillor Watson just mentioned social isolation. Both with my cabinet member for health hat on, I did really welcome the piece on social isolation. And I noticed that you said it's at twice as detrimental for older people to their health, twice as detrimental as obesity. And it was good that you included examples from places like Manchester. I know we have some good practice here in places like New Addington, curiously enough, but it's good to actually learn from places like Manchester. The other side of the coin, and you talked about appreciating the diversity of the workforce and making sure that the diversity is reflected in the senior posts in the workforce. And I do think we have to have the sort of high-paid jobs to which you refer, and we do have to keep an eye on making sure that we don't have sectors of society that are socially excluded or begin to form an underclass. I really think we have to work to actually make sure that we end up as a cohesive Croydon. And finally, I just end on saying, yes, we are a London living wage employer. However, we do have to perhaps use this report to get employers to do away with zero contract hours, because you referred to job insecurity, and there's nothing that actually adds to job insecurity as the whole use of zero contract hours, because people, the employer may pay the London living wage, but then if the employee doesn't know whether he or she is being employed for 2 hours this week and 20 next week or vice versa, then obviously that doesn't help the security. And the comments on child poverty were very welcome, because in places like Field, where there's probably 50% child poverty as opposed to nigh zero in other places. So thank you so much for the report, and hopefully the community can use it to make sure we go forward in a positive way.
Thank you very much, Louisa. Councillor Alison Butler.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's been really interesting reading it and hearing those views. I'd be quite interested to hear from you. Clearly, one of the perceptions and the original report is about, if you do have a fair society with equal opportunity, then everybody benefits, whether you're higher up the pile or at the bottom. And whether that was recognised when you spoke to people across the borough, that actually, even if you are better off, if people have equal access to opportunity, then that improves actually the kind of environment you live in.
Thank you for that, Alison. I've got an eye on the clock. Is anyone else? I've seen Elisa. Right, I've seen lots of people. So I'll bring Jonathan back in a minute, but sit back in the chair, I think. Elisa, Councillor Kathy B, Councillor Robert Canning, okay, well, and Councillor Tony Letts, Councillor Matthew Keremiah, and Amida, of course. Okay.
Just to say also that I welcome the report and thank you in particular for the focus on the third chapter in relation to education and no child being left behind. I liked the way that your synopsis at the beginning, a fair start and fair chances, and often some of the work that we've been doing around the Best Start proposal really looks at that and ensuring that when our young people begin school, that their development levels are as such to a level that they'll be able to keep up with the rest of the children. And some of the comments that you've raised, in particular around the faith community and additional work that we could be doing with the voluntary sector. I note that 2 of the recommendations, one in relation to the reading in school, and something that it's not new to the board essentially, but something that we need to do focus more on in terms of parents coming into schools to read to children, and the greater use of role models, especially black women, just to show that actually you can do anything that you want to do. So I think some really interesting things that have come out here. And I'm glad to see that there's been such a focus, because essentially when we're talking about employment opportunities, etc., moving forward, and the links into the new shopping centre, it was interesting and important that we remembered that actually we want jobs for young people, that retail is a good thing, and you know, I'm not knocking it, I've worked in retail myself, but beyond that, probably into the banking sector, etc. So thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. Cathy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd also like to share my thanks for producing what I think is a really good report. I suppose one of the things that occurs to me is that you're talking in here about involving communities and devolving more power to communities. And one of the things that strikes me is that we hear, as councillors, we hear a lot from people who believe that they're almost entitled, you know, it's their role to comment on things. And we have other parts of the community who are much less likely to do that. And I think one of the challenges is how can we ensure that that part of the community also feel empowered to tell us what they think and to get involved in taking things on and running things. So just sort of some thoughts on that, please.
Thank you, Cathy. Councillor Robert Cadden.
Thanks, Leader. Can I also add my welcome to the report? I think a huge amount of work has gone into it, and I think it's an excellent interim report. Can I ask what consideration was given to transport issues, or was that one that sort of got left out because it's being looked at elsewhere? Because it seems to me that there are a whole range of relevant issues, such as access to cars, access to bus routes, tram routes, and indeed the cost of transport, all of which are fundamental to people living their daily lives and getting around Croydon.
Okay, we're taking all these down. I think we'll be coming back on some of them, or the Chair will. Councillor Matthew Jeremiah.
Thank you very much, Leader, and thank you. I think I also add my voice to the many gratitude that have been shown so far about the report and the work that you've done and what you continue to do. My little bit is in terms of equality and the fairness with respect to the 56% of people who have contributed so far. What make do you take of that in terms of, I mean, we're not talking about two Croydons, and we want to make sure that all the two Croydons are talking together, not just one part seeking opportunity or fairness for themselves, and the other part seeing themselves as victims or not receiving a reward. So could you give us a flavor of how these two communities have got involved in participating in what you have done so far? If they haven't done so, have you got any plans to make sure that that happens so that we are talking to ourselves, I mean, from both sides? Thank you.
Okay, I've got to just come in a few more speakers here. Councillor Tony Letts.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. I'd like to congratulate the Bishop and the all of the commissioners, and indeed all those who took part in this producing this document as a draft document. One of the things that I want to say I'm so pleased to see here is the one about isolation, because isolation is not seen, it's not necessarily heard, and the people who are isolated tend to talk to their televisions or sometimes lose themselves in a bottle of gin or other. So I'm so pleased to see it here. But I think the other issue is, from talking and working with families in my ward, is that I want to grow aspirations in whole families. You know, I always say, if you educate a mother, if you invest in a mother and give her a skill and knowledge and training, so she can reach her aspirations, her children will do so as well. So I think we've also got to concentrate on the whole family, not just the child. I repeat, if you invest in mother, you invest in the whole family.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Maggie Mansell.
Sorry, I thought there were lots more people before me. Yes, thank you. I also am looking at the social isolation chapter, and you have quite rightly mentioned carers and older people, but I am certainly seeing a number of middle-aged men, and I would say mid-30s upwards, if that's defined as middle age. Particularly those who have lost families, often because they are unable to maintain relationships for one reason or another. Often that in itself comes from having had disrupted childhoods for all kinds of reasons, particularly domestic violence. And it's often associated with mental health and or drinking behaviour, which is one way of escaping the isolation and the situation that people find themselves in. And I just wonder whether you've had an opportunity to talk with and think about what can be done to support that particularly single men and that age group. I know we've got some ideas ourselves. Unfortunately, most of these things cost money, and we are, as everybody knows, we are fairly strapped for cash these days. But I think it's important to raise the issue if you like to get it on the agenda.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm going to bring in Councillor Bernadette Khan, and then I'm going to bring in the Vice Chair and Chair of the Commission to wrap up this piece, because we run up against the clock, but it's fantastic. So many people want to make a contribution this evening. Councillor Bernadette.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is excellent, and I'd certainly like to congratulate all the people who've given their time and been involved, because this is now an excellent blueprint for us as politicians and as a council. And I wondered whether there would be something to be gained if we could have academia now tracking and mapping and pushing for a development of some of these concepts and ideas in a document like this, because I think we would gain a lot in that too, but it would also help us perhaps to secure some of the funding that will be required if we're going to push some of this change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. David, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Yeah, just Councillor David.
Thank you, Leader. Just similar to touch on what Bernadette just said there, actually. Certainly as an admirer of the work of bishops of Croydon throughout history, can I just wanted to, in all sense, I just wanted to thank you for your energy and your commitment to this work. And as a relatively new councillor representing residents who stand to benefit hugely from much of the work that you've done, I just wanted to say that my intention is certainly to use the work of the Commission and the findings as a template for what I want to achieve as a councillor. And so I just wanted to make that point, and thank you for it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, and for the reference to the fantastic contribution of former bishops of this wonderful place called Croydon. Can I now bring in Councillor Hamida Ali, who in her role as Vice Chair of the Commission, and thank you on behalf of so many people, Hamida, for the work and contribution and the time you've given up, along with everyone else involved in this.
Thank you. I, like you, recall how we were inspired very much by the London Borough of Islington, who started this nationwide trend to look at these entrenched inequalities in our societies and how they play out against that very punishing financial backdrop. We are, I think, the 22nd or the 23rd in the country to look at these issues, and I think Brighton and Hove has just begun their work, one of those that started after us. Just to pick up on some of the questions around the extent to which we have responded to that full diversity in its broadest sense across the borough, and some of the questions that have been raised about that reality of the two Croydons, that what can sometimes be seen as that north and south divide. In the way in which we went about our work, that was something that we were very conscious of. In fact, it's stated in our statement of principles at the top of the report that was something that we very much wanted to address. We are very conscious, as Councillor B pointed to, that there are certain realities about the extent to which people from certain groups or certain backgrounds are disproportionately more likely to have their say, come forward, say what they think, get involved, and that was something that we wanted to really flex every muscle to ensure that we were addressing. So it's visible, I think, from the report that we went to different locations, to groups of residents that were active in very different parts of the borough, whether that was Coulsdon, whether that was Thornton Heath, whether that was New Addington. And as the Bishop pointed to, that level of community energy it certainly isn't determined according to socioeconomic circumstances. And I think that does come through in the report. We were also conscious of other issues, other characteristics that might determine who was likely to come forward. So whether that's in terms of age, whether that's in terms of ethnicity, whether that's in terms of disability and other issues, we were really conscious about that. I think it is a challenge for any endeavour to be able to achieve what it sets out to in that respect, but it's something that we have really tried to do, and will continue to in the course of our interim consultation period. I'd also like to echo everybody's thanks to commissioners around the table who have worked very hard and in quite a hidden way, lots of work going on behind the scenes, and indeed to the campaign company who have done, really worked so hard to support us in all our endless requests and asks, and to all the residents who've taken part so far and who may be yet to give us their views. I think, from my point of view, it has been an extremely tough endeavour. I think precisely because these are issues that have been looked at so many times, because these patterns of inequality are so entrenched in our societies, and I think for that reason it has been an extremely challenging but rewarding process at the same time. And I would finally just like to stress that it is a consultation period. This interim report is exactly that. It is an interim one, very much designed to test our thinking, to share our workings out, if you like, at this earlier stage, and to give others an opportunity to help us refine our recommendations so that they are as specific and precise as possible.
Thank you very much indeed, Hamida. Jonathan, I know there's a lot there and we wouldn't expect precise answers to everything, but over to you for some concluding thoughts and comments.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for your contributions. This is an ongoing building up process, and some of the things that have been said around the table I think will help us going on further. And particularly that comment about social isolation and single men. That is something we've discussed at various points. There's this wonderful initiative we came across called Men in Sheds, which doesn't sound so promising as a title, I don't think, but it's working around the idea that in order to get men to do things together, you have to give them something to make or do. If you ask them to come and talk to each other, they're never going to do that. So there are some things that we followed up, and we could certainly give that a higher profile. Thank you. That's a really important point. Just to briefly mention one or two others, transport was something we looked at an early stage, and our prioritisation process ended up putting it just below the bar of things we had time or space to look at. So that, we acknowledge it's one of those important issues that we just haven't had the capacity for. Academic follow-up, that would be lovely. That'd be great. I mean, not our job, but if it was to be, I think there'll be a lot of material here that people might want to come up with. Two more important points. One about people's sense of what fairness is and whether there's an awareness that a fairer society actually works for everybody. I have to say that didn't come across. People don't particularly perceive that. It may be true, but actually what people perceive fairness about in terms of our results is around starting conditions, primarily. That's what the word we get back from the street. And one about your point about local neighbourhoods taking responsibility. And this just came up in the conversation we were having this afternoon, because I've been wrestling with how you do this in a way that doesn't just involve the normal people who want to come and have yet another conversation about litter. And I thought, actually, if you were to try and set up some of your local dynamics around doing things which are about what we can do, rather than what we can tell somebody else they should be doing, you might end up with a very different group of people. For instance, if part of your local neighbourhood developing sense of responsibility is around setting up a framework for people to visit those who are isolated, you might get a very different set of people turning up. So if it isn't just a sort of, a talking shop around, this is us yet again telling the council what they should do, but this is us saying what we can do for each other, then there's the possibility there for some of the unusual suspects to be involved. That's just an idea that came out of the conversation we were having an hour ago, so it's about as formed as that. But that's the sort of thing we're trying to work on. So just say thank you very much. This is, as Hamida said, is an ongoing process. We do want your input, and we want to make it better so that it's something we can all own and really celebrate when it finishes.
Thank you very much, and I would urge obviously everyone in the room and anyone observing this and through other portholes to make those contributions, comment on the report and those suggestions, and to try and find those missing pieces of the jigsaw, and urge the Leader of the Opposition to send his thoughts in on a postcard at some point as well. Thank you very much indeed for being here this evening. Thank you. Thank you very much again. So moving seamlessly on to the Go On Croydon report. I was privileged to take part in the launch last week. We were down at Matthew's Yard, had Martha Lane Fox and a host of others in town for a fantastically well supported launch with a very powerful message indeed, which you're going to see some of now. So I'm handing over to I think a combination of Mark and Graham for this presentation. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. We've got a short film and then a presentation, but before we start, I'd just like to remind, we brought a paper to Cabinet a few months ago talking about how we would tackle digital exclusion across the borough. We want to do that because, not just because it's a good way of tackling social isolation, but we have many residents that are being left behind, and it's our duty to make sure that all our residents have access to services and actually have the basic digital skills. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to progress this and work with Go On, a charity. We're the only London borough they're working with at the moment, and they wanted to work with us because of the great enthusiasm we've shown to progress this agenda. So I think we'll see the film and then I'll go a couple of slides. Croydon Council is hoping to achieve a great deal by being involved with Go On Croydon. And that's not just unlocking the potential of residents who don't have the basic skills at the moment, but also to involve organisations, small businesses, big businesses within the borough. We know that residents will be able to save money. The average resident will save about £600 by going online. We know that many services are only available online, so those without basic digital skills are denied access to those services.
I think there's two reasons that people should support Go On Croydon. Firstly, it's just a great community effort. It's a chance to get hundreds or maybe thousands of people just working towards the same ideal to help each other improve each other's lives. But then also from an individual aspect, it's going to enable people to take control of their own lives and create their own opportunities.
I think in this age it is really important for people to get online because it opens up a whole new world for them, and it helps build up social relationship and make friends and learn something new as well.
To someone who is thinking about being a digital champion, I would say don't hesitate, just go along there and try it, and you'll probably find that you really enjoy it and that you've got a lot more to give than you think.
It helps me to know how to be able to search my invoices. I can go and do my emails. I can get it online on Skype, and Skype my sister in America, in Barbados, and all over the world. I talk to people, and it's really helpful.
We want to combat social isolation, so it'll be a way of engaging communities that we don't normally engage with. I hope people with digital skills will actually work with those people that need digital skills to come together, so increase the number of volunteering. So I think there's many benefits to the Go On project, and I would hope that all the residents will get behind that, because it is making Croydon a better, more connected, more equal place for people to live and work. Anyway, yeah, this is a great initiative, and I think there's some of the stats up there. I'm not going to just read them all out, but if the figures are actually about £1,000 that someone with basic digital skills will benefit from by going online than those without basic digital skills. If those have got more advanced skills, that figure rises to about £1,700. Now, if you've got 85,000 people in Croydon that are losing out on £1,000 a year because they're not online, that's £85 million that's being lost out of our economy. That money could be spent within the Croydon economy. So these are big numbers we're talking about. So there's a real benefit in getting those people online, but also missing out on all the other benefits that the internet offers people. So it's not just about the money. I think there's many services, as I said, are only available online, so they're being denied access to those services. But there are also those connections, that social connections that people can do online, and particularly around Skyping family and friends in a way that it can really make a difference to people. And if we could get lots of our socially isolated people online, looking, Skyping each other and supporting each other, we could obviously bring those benefits together. So part of the work we're going to do, and obviously Go On and leading on some of this, but the council's fully committed to this. We have 20 digital zones across the borough, which we're working with our partners to do. The Croydon staff have already signed up. I think the figure is actually higher than 350 now that have signed up to be digital champions, and we want to encourage as many people as possible to come forward to share those skills and help people to get online. And remember, the big barrier for most people isn't actually the technology, it's that fear of going online in the first place. So having somebody to help them and just show them how to go online for the first time can make an enormous difference to those people. We're going to have pop-up zones, and we've got partners to come and assist with people across the borough, providing space, providing hardware and software technical assistance to people. And the project is going to target specific groups. Obviously, older people are a target group, but also young people that are not in education, employment or training, and the number of small businesses we have across the borough that actually have no web presence even, or don't have the basic digital skills themselves. How do we get them to go online, get those basic digital skills? Because that's affecting their business as well. So we can improve their businesses by getting them online. And clearly other groups, people that may be in poverty at the moment, the homeless people, how do we get them access to the internet? And of course, the RNIB have been doing a lot of work around online for a long time, because getting people with disabilities online is a huge way for them to be able to engage. These are the national partners that are working with us on the Go On project. And these are the partners that we've got signed up locally. And that includes housing associations, community groups, and partners, the voluntary sector partners like Tech City. And I think now we're going to hear from a couple of people, because it's all right talking about people going online, but we want to really know what that means to people. So we have two guest speakers who are going to talk very briefly about their experience. So can I ask June to say a few words?
Good evening, everybody. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm from St Philip's, Norbury, and our priest has started a computer class for us on Friday mornings. I haven't any computer or anything I can use at home, and I listen to the television, and usually they end up saying and go to www. And I can't. So I'm finding it very nice to go on Friday mornings. We have a cup of tea and coffee and a chat, and we've got some helpers that come and show us. I knew absolutely nothing, and now I can start it going anyway. And I have an email address, and my family send me some messages on for me to find, and then I have to try and send them one back. It's hard work, but I think if I live many more years, it'll be very necessary for me to have one at home, just to help me to carry on with life independently. So I'm very grateful for the help I'm getting. Thank you.
Thank you, June. And June, by the way, does exist. I've been talking about you all weekend, June, so people think I made you up, but you do exist as an example of somebody we've managed to get online and is enjoying it. So thank you, June. Can I ask Colveen to also say a few words?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clovine Morris. I am 69 years old, and I'm a retired health visitor. I had no idea about computer, and I certainly had no computer skills to talk about until my daughter went to university. The first year at university, she said to me, "Mom, I won't be home for summer because I've got work to do, and I need a computer to do it." Of course, we didn't have a computer, so I went out and bought a computer. And my daughter used it for the summer, and then she went back to university, and I was left with the computer. I hadn't a clue what to do with the computer, but I soon found out. With the help of Age Concern, I had free lessons, and I learned I could practice at home because I had a computer, so it wasn't long until my skills started to grow and to flourish. I now know how to do lots of things on a computer. I can send emails to my family all over the world and to my friends where they are. I can pay my bills. I can shop. I like shopping on email. I know how to do lots of other stuff as well. I know about Facebook and Twitter and banking and all of these things. Now, I am not at all pretending that I'm a whiz kid on a computer. I've still got a very long way to go. But I have started, and I think I'm making good progress. I not only have knowledge now, but I have increased confidence that I can sit down and work on it until I get what I want to do done. So I am so grateful to Age Concern, who gave me the lessons. And even now I'm retired, so I don't use a computer for work like I did. I can use it for my own private things, and I still have lessons. I can still go along to lessons and meet other people and learn new things. So I am indeed fortunate and very grateful for the help I've received.
Thank you, Colveen. I think perhaps you could probably come and give some of my colleagues some lessons on the internet. I think you're probably using it more than many of us are. We've got a couple more slides. It's just how we're going to do this. So very much we are ambitious for Croydon on this. I think we are. This is an ambitious thing. This is about making a real difference to the lives of a large chunk of our residents and bringing them with us. So we're very much committed to leading the way on digital and technological growth so that everybody is better connected, that everybody has the same opportunities and access to services and can connect with each other. We don't want anybody left behind, and I think it's as technology changes, as things move forward, it can often feel people feel left behind. And I think one of the big things about digital inclusion is that feeling that people that they feel they're not being left behind if they're getting connected and understand it. And I think actually, although technology is moving on, I think it's actually getting simpler to use, and we need to be making sure that everybody has access to that and give them the help they need to make sure that we don't leave any of the communities behind, but also the businesses and volunteering community groups to get online as well. Graham and I have been working on a package for community groups, so if they want to come and set up a digital zone, or similar to the Norbury Church project, we'll work that out so they come there and say, look, this is what you need to do, this is the equipment you need, this is how you need to do it. And the Active Communities Fund will also fund those sort of projects. So this is actually getting community groups as well to be able to do some of this work. It's not just a council, it's bringing all our partners together. And there we are chatting about online again with June. So it is about the basic digital skills, and these are the skills that people need just to be able to do some of the basic things online. But I think if people get those basic digital skills, that gives them the confidence to be able to do more. And actually I find a lot of it is that initial barrier, I think, is the important thing. So giving people those very basic digital skills, I think, will give them the chance to do that. So we're working with as many residents as we can. We've got all our partners working in, so it's the voluntary sector, it's businesses. I was speaking to the police last week also about how they might help with the online security as well for people to allay their fears. We've got our digital zone. I don't know if it's been in Access Croydon across the road, but we now have a digital zone so people can get support and get connected. Anybody that's coming in to the Access Croydon, we give them help and support to get online. We don't just say you have to do it online. We will give people the help and assistance they need to be able to do that. We have 120,000 people signed up to my account online, so we know people can do that. But now we have the digital zones as well, which can give people the confidence to be able to get online. I'm now going to ask Sarah Bridges, who's the director at Go On UK, to say a few words.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. Go On UK is an independent funded charity, and we work in partnership with a wide range of national, regional and local organisations from the public, private and not-for-profit sectors. And our vision is for everyone to have the basic digital skills that they need to prosper in an increasingly digital world. We've heard some great stories from June and Clavine about why that is so important here this evening. We want to have everyone to have the opportunity to learn the skills that they need to take part in society, and digital inclusion, as you've heard, is a very complex issue, and I want to thank everyone that we've worked with at Croydon Council so far in planning this project and getting us to such a successful launch last Monday, for all of their enthusiasm and support and commitment to this as such an important issue. The aim is to encourage people to feel more confident in online tasks that many of us take for granted, such as saving time and money, finding deals online or a new job, all while staying safe online. And you've heard how important it is that this is a cross-sector opportunity and challenge. So it's not just for the council, it's not just for the housing associations in your area, it's for big businesses, small businesses, public sector organisations, voluntary and community sector organisations, faith groups and community groups to come together. Our research has shown that people like to learn from people like them, people like to learn from trusted intermediaries, people who they know and trust. Those people can be family members, they can be members of a community group, they could be a carer. It's really important that this is embedded across everything from your Fairness Commission work to transport, to police, to community work. It's absolutely a cross-issue area. So we've committed to work with you for 12 months and bring the strength of our national partners and the resources that Go On UK can bring into Croydon, and we're really excited about working with you in the year ahead. There's been a huge amount of resource and activity already, and there's a huge amount going on already in Croydon. But in the last year, according to our research, the number of people with basic digital skills nationally has only increased by 1%. So that is what the difference will be if everything stays the same and this issue is addressed in the way that it's being addressed currently. So it's really important that this issue is embedded across everything that we do. I'd particularly like to thank Councillor Watson and Councillor Newman for their support so far, and also Graham Cadle and his team, the brilliant Anne Sturziker and Annabelle Barricada, and also Hayley Lewis and her team have been fantastic support for us and all of the work that we've done so far. They've engaged with so many local partners, and there's been such a huge amount of support from across the council and across services. I'd like to end with a challenge to you all. One of the projects that we worked with a few years ago was Go On It's Liverpool, and one of the elements that enabled that programme to have such a successful outcome in enabling residents of Liverpool to become offline, so over 50% of the people in Liverpool who had never been online before, after 18 months, were online according to Office of National Statistics data, and they remained online and used the internet effectively. And one of the things that was really important to that was the political support in Liverpool and the support of the councillors. So all 90 councillors gained their own basic digital skills if they didn't have those skills already. And those councillors became digital champions themselves and either helped a friend or a family member or a colleague or somebody in the local community to gain those skills that you've heard today are so important to people in their everyday lives. So if you have digital skills, I implore you and everyone in Croydon to help those people that do not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'd like to just give my thanks to Sarah and the whole team there at Go On. And I think there's such enthusiasm for this piece of work. And I think that it's really refreshing to see something. Quite often, local government, it's not all fun. But this is a project that I think is both enthusiastic in support for. But I think will make a real difference to lots of our residents. So I'd like to thank you and your team for working with us on that. And I'd also like to thank Graham and his team for their enthusiasm as well. This is definitely a project I think we can all get behind and that will make a real difference. And finally, I think we've got a few words from Martha Lane Fox, who of course is the...
I think Go On Croydon has the opportunity to be a mini case study for the whole UK. We have a very profound digital skills problem in the UK, and what might seem like one small step for Croydon is actually potentially a huge leap for the whole country as we see how it really can work to bring different organisations together to help get hundreds of thousands more people on the internet. I think the best thing about the project here in Croydon is that we're doing deep dives for a few very vulnerable groups of people, homeless people, older people, people with disabilities, and what we hope to learn from that is that the best ways that we can encourage them online, and most importantly for them, the ways that the internet can really benefit their daily life. Small things like getting your shopping delivered, or bigger things like finding work, or perhaps connecting with people in your family that you hadn't seen for a long time. Go On UK is the Digital Skills Alliance, and we have 10 amazing board partners around our boardroom table. And the thing that originally I always thought about was, can we bring these interesting combinations of people together in a local area to show the difference that it can make to a place? So this is a very important project for Go On UK because we're trying to test the model right at its very core. If you bring lots of interesting different organisations together, can you make a big difference in a local community? So we're really excited to work with Croydon, with the council, with all of the partners here who've helped make today and all the work that's going to go on beyond a success. So thank you from me, and thank you from the Go On team, and thank you from the Go On UK board members.
So thank you to Mark and it's Sarah, to you and Cloveen and June, I think, for being absolutely inspirational, because this is actually what this is. People think it's about technology. I would say it's about humanity, actually. It's about people. It's about what you talked about, people being in touch and people who have been able to support themselves and independence. And it's about so much more than whatever piece of kit you're typing in, whatever you're doing. You get that, and I think it's so important that the rest of society does. And speaking with Martha last week, she agreed with me that she would come back to Croydon, back to Matthews Yard next year, where we will, on the condition that we are down there celebrating success and actually making sure we're performing above that rather low national average, and we can really show that, it's an overused word, word partnership, but where you've got the power of the council, of your organisation, of all those people involved in the private and public and voluntary sector working with us, that we really can change and get so many of those 80,000 people who are currently aren't, in any sense of the word, connected with us, and access and a much more equal access to all those services and other wonderful things. So absolutely brilliant work all round to everybody. Any other comments or contributions? No, I think everyone's been just blown away with that. Thanks again, and we'll report back. I think during the year, Graham and Mark will make sure we do that. And then, as I said, if we've done that right, then we'll all be back with Martha in a year from now. So thank you and well done again. Can we agree that the paper cabinet?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, and move on now to the equally important agenda item of welfare reforms and future rollout of universal credit. And if I could go first to, again, Councillor Mark Watson.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, the last paper was showing us what a difference digital inclusion will make to many of our residents. And I think this paper is very important because it shows what those changes to welfare are going to mean to our residents. And we talked about fairness earlier, and I think these changes here are going to have an enormous impact on our residents, and it sort of sets out what that's actually going to mean to people, but what we as a council, what the implications are for us as a council, because there will be costs. Some of those costs will be now borne by the council, but also I think the good work that our team is doing to support our residents through these changes. And if you look at the report, it's sort of in 2013, the changes to council tax benefit was replaced with council tax support, the introduction of the benefit cap, which had an impact on many of our residents, and the introduction of the bedroom tax. But those things affected 16,000 of our residents. We're losing a total of £8 million a year from the Croydon economy. And all that £8 million would be lost mostly, I pretty much guarantee most of that money would otherwise have been spent in the Croydon economy. So we've lost that money through those changes. And we're talking about fairness, Chair, and I think just in the same year, 2013, Amazon paid just £3.2 million in tax on £4.2 billion worth of sales. So the £8 million that we've lost out of there, I think it's a great shame that the Conservative government have used such zeal and vigour to reduce benefits on our very poorest people, while instead of using the same zeal and vigour to be able to tackle corporation tax. And I think that's a great shame. We wouldn't see these changes happening otherwise. So the paper sets out a number of the changes, how these further changes are going to affect our residents, and there's changes on the way. I think the other thing I find very unfair about these changes is we went through a whole process with many of these residents that were losing £50 a week in some cases. We helped a lot of these people to rebudget, to reorganise their lives through those benefit cap changes, and now they're going to have to do that all over again and lose more money. And I think, we've got people that are some of the poorest people, most vulnerable people in the borough, and we're making them lose another £50 a week in many cases. That's a huge amount for some of the very poorest people to be able to cope with. So it's not just the scale of the changes, but having to do that one year after another, I think is very unfair. And we've set out here the number of people that are going to be affected by those changes. And you can see just the freezing of the JSA and the ESA is going to affect 24,000 of our residents. The tax credits, more people affected. So I think it is important for people to realise that these changes are having a real impact on our residents. But I would like just to acknowledge the good work of Mark Fowler and his team in how they've worked to try and have a holistic approach to tackling this and supporting our residents through these changes. I think, my view is these changes are very unfair, but we are supporting residents as best we can through those changes. But there will be some very serious consequences for many of these people. Some people will have to end up leaving the borough because of these changes, and we should acknowledge that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, this really is an attack on some of the most vulnerable. I was actually speaking to my ward. Somebody in my ward went out campaigning who had actually said to me they voted a Conservative in the general election, but they said they didn't know they were voting for this. And they made it quite clear they wouldn't be doing that again. I think there is a sense of a betrayal out there by those who thought that the party that won that election were offering something different from such an outright and sustained attack on the most vulnerable, as we're also seeing with George Osborne's other plans that have only been halted at the moment in terms of the House of Lords. Councillor Alison Butler.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for this paper. And the paper certainly is around the good and the bad. And the good would be the fantastic work Mark Fowler and our Gateway team have actually been doing, working with people who are affected already by changes and sort of working to identify those who will be affected in the future so that we can start working with them before these cuts are imposed. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the effects for people and their housing situations that were through this welfare reform. And we've spoken about many times in this chamber how having a decent and a secure home actually affects the rest of your life chances, those employment chances, those education chances, about getting on in life, and particularly health. So there's particular parts of this that I'm really worried about. The freeze on the local housing allowance over the next 4 years, and that literally means that many will be completely squeezed out of the market. It means that people on the lowest incomes will not be able to afford to rent homes in the borough. We've seen the attack on social housing and how we're going to be losing our social housing, and this is really making it very desperate for people. The household benefit caps, where many people may say, well, people should only get so much benefit, why should they get more benefit? I think in London we have to take on the realisation that the majority of that benefit goes on rents. It doesn't go into people's pockets, it doesn't go into their spending or buying gifts or presents for their family, it goes on the rent, trying to find somewhere to live. So it's not a luxury in any sense. And as this report says, 90 people, 90 households, 90 families, our Croydon children may no longer be able to live here because of these changes. Another worry is around the shortening of the backdating of housing benefit. We can see how many people benefited from that in the last year, and it only went to those who were entitled to the benefit, who had the grounds for backdating, and reducing that from 6 months to 1 month is really going to lead to rental arrears, and once you're in rental arrears, you're in a downward spiral. The 18 to 21s, the abolishing of housing benefit for them. For some that will be fine, for some they'll have places to live, but for many that's a real problem. The reducing of housing costs for single residents, reducing that from £152 a week to a limit of £82 a week. Well, I challenge people to find a decent home to live in for that amount a week. This, coupled with the stuff coming through in the housing and planning bill, really is a threat to people's family life in Croydon. And with a reduction in the discretionary housing payments, we're really losing our ability to assist families. So I really think that whatever the reasoning behind this, it's going to have a devastating effect on our families in Croydon.
Thank you, Alison, and it's hitting some of the truly most vulnerable people and those people who, you know, in the words of many politicians, are out there working hard and trying to do the best they can on low incomes. I have today written a letter to the Prime Minister of this country with the appalling revelation, I thought, that in terms of his own local council, when he didn't realise the impact that government policies were having on the local council where he lives. So we're writing to the Prime Minister very much in the same terms as the Conservative leader did locally to David Cameron as the Prime Minister, and I think the people of Croydon are every bit as much entitled to ensure that the Prime Minister, as well as now understanding the impacts his policies have on the people of in Oxfordshire, that he understands, which he by his own admission clearly doesn't, the impact that so many of his policies are having on the residents of Croydon. Hugely damaging, hugely long-term damaging and sustained damage to communities and people's lives, and so many young people as well. So I anticipate that very much like the local council leader next to David Cameron's home, that I would expect we'll be getting an invite to Downing Street to put that case on behalf of the people of Croydon, and very much look forward to Councillor Pollard joining me on the trip. Can I bring in Mark, because this is, as my colleagues have said, this is a mixed paper, because it contains some very, very potentially damaging information, but also it's a recognition from us of the fantastic work that officials have done in Croydon to make the very, very best of a very difficult situation for so many. So, Mark, on behalf of the Cabinet, and thanks to you and your team, but over to you.
Thank you, Leader. That's heartening to hear, and I'll pass that back to the team. As already very clearly set out, these are very challenging times, and whilst the Council will do what it can to effectively work with residents, the financial difference that we're talking about now is taking us into sort of a slightly different position. So the budgeting and finding work that were the options before, we will certainly have to consider more radical solutions this time around, tapping into what we've already seen this evening with regards to Go On, the Opportunities and Fairness Commission, but actively looking at sort of proper housing solutions, and these could potentially be out of borough. But we are well prepared with regards to those affected and some of the potential solutions that we have available.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Maggie Mansell, and then Councillor Jason Cummins.
Thank you very much. What occurs to me is that we have already seen a migration of people from central London, from Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster, Hammersmith, Fulham and Wandsworth, to the outer suburbs. And we've had to deal with particularly large families coming out of the centre, but various people who have been unable to meet the rent requirements in those boroughs. Do you think that this is going to mean that we have an exodus from Croydon of low-paid people, which could mean that it's much more difficult to recruit people for the low-paid jobs as they are at present in, for instance, the caring industry, in the retail industry, and various other low-paid jobs? And could this be a particular risk for the borough?
Thank you, Maggie. Well, I think the answer to that is clearly yes. You know, Boris Johnson, when he originally spoke out against this policy, although he's gone somewhat quieter recently, said we didn't want to see a policy of social exclusion, but that's what we are seeing. And to make a city like London or a borough like Croydon work, you need to be able to support people on all different income levels to play their part in that economy, and this attacks that as well. And I think the point you make is just one of many, many potentially, well, very real damaging impacts. Councillor Jason Cummins.
Thank you. Can I thank Councillor Watson for pointing out the tax situation with Amazon and blaming it all on the Conservative government. I'm sure he will like to reflect on the fact that they were paying considerably less tax under the last Labour government, and I know you wouldn't want to point that out. But with regard to your report, in section 3.4 there's one line in your report which is supposed to, it said at the start, give particular focus to the rollout of universal credit. It says it's believed that under universal credit, working residents are in an improved financial position, reflected in Appendix 1. Appendix 1 is then attached, which suggests that a whole range of people will actually be benefiting from the rollout of universal credit. There's been absolutely no mention that anybody would be benefiting from universal credit. So perhaps could you confirm whether anybody, I know you don't want to mention any good news, but will some people be benefiting from universal credit? The report seems to suggest so.
Well, Can we hold the response to Jason's point just for a second, because a whole raft of hands went up. Well, I'm trying to bring as many people in. It's good news that the opposition have woken up 1 hour 56 minutes into the meeting, so that's to be welcomed. But so if you after 1 hour 56 minutes, I think you could probably wait another couple of minutes out of courtesy. Councillor Robert Canyon.
Thanks, Leader. Could I echo all the earlier comments about how unfair and damaging these welfare changes are going to be to the people of Croydon? One element that causes me a lot of concern is in paragraph 3.9 of the universal credit discussion. The focus is about what it means for landlords, because the housing benefit, which, as Councillor Butler said, is often, usually probably the largest element of the benefits that an individual receives. But the housing benefit, as indeed with all the other benefits of the universal credit, it'll see all of the money going to the tenant in the rented sector, which includes a lot of money to cover the housing costs. And whilst the paper notes that there are some arrangements in place for vulnerable, those who can't manage their financial affairs or have 8 weeks rent arrears, there must be a very, very real risk that tenants will spend all of their money up front as soon as they get it, and consequently won't be able to afford their rent going forward. So that seems to be a very short-sighted policy on the part of the government. From Croydon Council's perspective, is there anything more we can do to assist those in receipt of universal credit to help them budget better and to manage their finances better? Otherwise we run a real risk, I think, of a lot of evictions and homelessness coming Croydon's way as a result of universal credit.
Thank you, Robert. I'll bring Councillor Alison Butler in to respond to a couple of those points, and then I've got Mark, then Elisa, and then we'll see where we are after that, and Simon.
On Jason's point, there will be some people better off under universal credit. It is a different way of paying benefits, and in some ways quite a sensible way of paying benefits. But the rollout has been difficult and complicated, and we're hearing a lot of noises about whether those tapers will be affected to make up for making the family tax credits fairer. But yes, some people will benefit from it and some people will lose from these, as it's very clear. And what we're particularly concerned about is the people at the bottom of the pile who are definitely going to lose out under this situation. Again, with the direct payment of rents, we really want to encourage people to handle their finances, to appreciate that a monthly income should be used for paying rent and for other family necessities. But when that income is so low and your rent is so high, that becomes incredibly difficult for families who have to make choices about what's best for their children and paying their rent. So it's a real risk. But certainly, Robert, the stuff that the Gateway team is doing is handling families in that situation at the moment, but also identifying those people that will be affected in the future so that we can do this work now to make sure that they've got a better chance.
Thank you. I'm very keen to bring in as many non-front bench spokespeople as possible. So, Councillor Hermione Kabir.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to congratulate Mark and his team for training 300 staff. I think it is vital that they are trained, and also we'd like to hear at some point, if it's possible, about their experience and numbers, how many people they have dealt with over a year or something. So it will be good to do that. And also, if this can be extended to community groups, because some people will not come to council because for various reasons, for various barriers. So if council can go to the communities with this type of training. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hermione, indeed, for that. Councillor Lisa Fleming.
Thank you. Kind of have to contain myself while I speak about this, because I just think that it's slightly outrageous and it beggars belief that anybody would think that it would be a good idea when we think about the levels of deprivation that are increasing within this borough. And for some of our residents, and as Alison has pointed out, the most vulnerable, whilst it would be a nice idea to get one payment a month, in particular looking at 3.8, there are so many residents within this borough that do not, unfortunately, for whatever reason it may be, have the skills and the capability to be able to manage their money in such a way so that at the end of the month, one, their bills are paid, but two, the children are fed and looked after. To go to a single payment process when for so many families come week 2 or week 3, they don't have the money to be able to do simple things like put gas on their gas card or top up their electricity keys or indeed feed their children who then go to school in the morning either having not had something to eat or come home in the evening and not have something to eat. It beggars belief that anybody in this chamber would sit down and say that actually we're being unreasonable when we're looking at what it is that the government is doing. We have to think about the residents that we are supposed to be serving and understand their needs. We're seeing increasing levels of families presenting as homeless. And one, it is because of the levels of the rent, but two, a mismanagement of that money, which means that they're not spending their money in the right ways, increasing levels of betting shops within the borough, and the one single payment, I'm sure we will see an increase in terms of where that money is going. So,
thank you, Elisa. Comments and noted, and very powerful. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I think on the Amazon tax bill, yes, I think Labour government could have done more to cut corporation tax. However, I think when you've come in and you've decided I'm going to identify where I'm going to make the savings from, what you haven't done is shown any vigour or zeal about tackling corporation tax. What you did is go straight on and find the savings from the most vulnerable people. And I think that was my point on that, is that there are other ways of raising income. You could have done the same amount of energy and put into tackling corporation tax if you had into taking money from the very poorest people. It is almost as if you've enjoyed taking the money from that. And I just think when David Cameron sort of welcomed the council tax credits stuff going through originally, I think it was almost joyous from that. And I think that's the difference. What I was trying to make the point there. On universal credit, I think, I didn't criticise that. I think some people will be a bit better off, and the report does say that. But I do think universal credit also throws up many challenges for those people. Getting one payment a month for people who are not used to it is going to be difficult. Paying people themselves instead of paying their landlord is going to put a lot of challenges on those people. So, yes, some people might be better off, but does that throw up a lot of challenges? Yes, and we're going to see how that is going to work out. We've done the trial, a very limited trial, and that has identified that there's going to be a lot of issues around that. And Mark, if you want to just say anything on that, because you've been very much involved in that trial.
So I think on the point with regards to universal credit, when people are employed in employment, they will financially be better off. It's proven from that. But there are factors to take into consideration when you think about the whole household. So the cost of the rent is one aspect, and also the potential reduction in tax credits as well. So when you actually look at the overall financial envelope, people will probably still be worse off, even though they will receive an improvement from the universal credit side. As Councillor Watson's rightly said, through the small trial that we've had so far, we've already identified that 10% of those customers are higher at medium risk, and that means that they already have problems with eviction and potential money management. So again, if we were to extrapolate that against the whole caseload of 30,000 customers over time, that's a considerable risk for the organisation.
Thank you very much. I'll bring others in, but I'm just going to take all colleagues. I think, in terms of surgeries for councillors, MPs as well. If you look at the bottom box on page 87, where a household has more than 2 children, benefit will be capped at 2 children. Impact for those moving to you see as a loss of 229 per child, as a claim will be deemed a new claim. If that policy was brought in China, I suggest David Cameron will be lecturing the Chinese on human rights. This is the stuff of nightmares, frankly, and I think it's indefensible, and shame on those who have introduced it. Councillor Tony Letts.
Thank you very much, Leader. You've actually made one of the points that I was going to make. But I think my question is probably to the Deputy Leader. I just wonder, have we seen private landlords not wanting to rent property to those who rely on housing benefit in the main to pay their rent? Because they may well see it as, not a safe case.
I think the issue has mainly been around not so much the tenants who are welcome, but the fact that you can only pay at the very bottom of the market. So landlords will look around and say, we can get a far higher rent elsewhere. These people are only restricted to this level of rent, so we'll find our tenants elsewhere.
Jason, did you want to come back?
I did, and thank you, Leader, for giving me the opportunity to. If I can come back to Councillor Watson very briefly. If you want to make a suggestion that I take any joy in the cuts that are being made and the impact that it will have on people who live in the poverty line, you don't know that I spent my entire childhood below the poverty line and in receipt of benefits with my 4 siblings. I do understand, I do know, and I take no joy at all in the financial circumstances of this country or what it does to people, because I have lived it firsthand. So please don't make those accusations against me. What I wanted to say was I wanted to thank Councillor Butler for the answer that she gave to my question, because she simply answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Councillor Stuart Collins.
Yeah, I wanted to support the point Mark was making in terms of the wider picture, because obviously I'm an experienced benefit fraud investigator, and I actually know the difference in emphasis in government on actually investigating benefit fraud and investigating tax fraud. And what I think most people find really annoying, who even work for Department of Work and Pensions and see government, is to see MPs celebrating and punching the air when a welfare bill was passed through. And I do accept the point you've made. You're clearly not saying that's something you'd celebrate. But when that picture goes round through social media, goes round everywhere, and the MPs that pass those bills celebrate that, and yet they have very little discussion at all about the number of tax investigators they're going to have investigating corporate tax fraud, it's very difficult for the people of this country not to see it, that it's always the people at the bottom that get the hardest whack. It's always the people at the bottom, if they're doing anything wrong, the big investigations are there. But whereas the vast majority of money that this country is losing is through tax fraud, and yet I would guarantee you there are far more benefits investigators than there are tax investigators. So I think on the bigger picture, government, and this would apply to previous governments, we really need to start concentrating a lot more on getting more money in through making sure people don't do these tax loopholes, and big companies pay the proper tax they should pay.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for those comments. To conclude this discussion, Councillor Simon Hall.
Thank you, Chair. The impact of these is going to be absolutely huge. A lot of families in this borough, particularly in wards like mine, but across the borough, are on the margins in terms of sort of managing to cope, managing to pay the bills that absolutely need to. And so, this is going to have disproportionate impact on them, particularly families with young adults in them, where those adults are going to be hugely affected, and therefore that produces strain on often also already overcrowded and stressed families. We risk seeing a lot of family breakdown. The Gateway, in Mark's team, the Gateway Department, which is, I believe, groundbreaking in its own right, is doing a fantastic job. But one of the things that's coming out of that work is that a lot of families already have multiple debts. When they come to the council for help in one area, there's 3 or 4 parts of the council as well as other debts that they have. With universal credit coming in, one of the bits that's almost certain to be put under pressure is the roof over their families. So that has a huge impact. We've already got things like the New Addington Food Bank not able to cope with the level of demand before this at the current time, really struggling to. And this is going to put incredible strain on a lot of very vulnerable families. We're doing with Gateway, with what we're doing on prevention, with Best Start, with early intervention, with all sorts of other areas to support families under this. But there are thousands, literally, of Croydon families who are going to suffer and be taken close to the edge or over the edge as a result of these, where we're seeing huge amounts being taken out of welfare at the same time as millionaires are being given tax breaks, and as Stuart so eloquently put, the effort on closing down tax loophole and dealing with tax fraud is being reduced rather than increased.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. Thank you again for officers for all the work you're doing in such difficult circumstances. Can we agree the report, Cabinet?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. If we could move on to agenda item 9, the Local Flood Risk Management Strategy 2015 and 20 and the consultation results. Councillor Cathy B.
Thank you, Leader. And as I said, flooding when it happens can be totally devastating, as we saw in 2014 in Dale Road. And it's not just the period, the dramatic bit, the bit with the boats and the water up to knees. It's actually afterwards that it can be a year or more before people actually get back into their homes and life returns to normal. So flooding is a really, really important issue, and we have a number of, I was going to call them hot spots, but probably wet spots is a better name for them. So we have areas of the borough such as Kenley, Purley, that we know particularly well that are prone to flooding, but there are other areas throughout the borough as well. And we have here today the final version of our flood risk management strategy, and I have to say it is flood risk management because it isn't possible to prevent flooding, because actually a very large part of flooding is the vagaries of the weather and what particularly sort of difficult weather patterns can do to us from time to time. So Croydon is a local lead flood authority. These were created by the Flood and Water Management Act 2010 in response really to the very serious floodings in 2007, and a change was made in terms of coordination of flooding because this was considered not to be adequate. So we have responsibility for coordinating responses across the borough. We are not responsible for doing everything about flooding, but we are responsible for coordinating it, and other bodies involved are Thames Water, DEFRA, and actually landowners. If you've got a bit of a stream going through your land, you have certain responsibilities there. So the strategy sets out our responsibilities and the responsibilities of others. And in particular, we've been busy looking at how we can reduce flood risk through making water flow more quickly away when we have heavy rain, things like making sure the gullies are cleared. We've also, recently work has been done on the culvert at Dale Road, which proved unbelievably more complicated, I think, than anybody imagined when they first started to clear that out. And also we're looking at increasing capacity so that we can hold water for longer and hold more water when there is a really big event. So the balancing pond at Purley Oak has been massively increased to help us out there. And we also have funding for 2 projects to look in more detail at some of our particularly difficult areas. So we're working with, we're one of 5 boroughs that have been awarded £1 million to look at flooding issues in the Caterham-Bourne catchment area. And we've also got some funding for looking at surface water flooding in the Kenley area. So the strategy goes into a lot of detail about the different types of flooding and what we can do to address that. And we've also got an appendix which shows the responses that we got from the 77 responders, and it also details which responses have led to an amendment in the strategy. So I'll leave it there and take questions.
Cathy, thank you very much, and for the work that you and Robert and your officer team are doing on this, another hugely important piece of work. Councillor Steve O'Connell.
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. And again, I would particularly thank officers for the work that they've put together in this report, which I've taken the time and trouble to read in detail, as you would expect, because clearly in my ward in Kenley, it was particularly affected back in early 14. I will have some questions later, but I'll be asking probably for some written responses because there's a lot of detail around it, so I wouldn't expect the responses tonight. I think it's really good news that we have obtained government funding, and I appreciate on behalf of my residents that the previous administration and this administration have already spent something like £850,000 of our own money in remedial work. Yes, this is a living document. It is a strategy document, but as Cathy pointed out, this has affected people in their homes. We can cast our minds back when we were only, I believe, minutes away from evacuating many dozens of homes in Kenley back in early 14. And even now, if you talk to people in Dale Road, they are affected. We had flooding about a month ago. We had some serious rain, and there is still surface water flooding in Dale Road. So this affects people, and I very much appreciate the work that has been done. So some of the questions I've got, one particularly is an observation about the consultation. As I've said, this is something that affects many households, not just in Kenley and Purley, but across in Norbury and other parts of town. There was only 70-odd respondees, which I think is rather odd. So what I would ask really is that the Council perhaps look at it itself as a way it consults, because it suggests to me that perhaps we didn't reach out wide enough. But that's a point from a strategic point. I managed to get access to the action plan, which is within the details. Now, probably other colleagues haven't got it. It did need blowing up a bit so you could actually see it. So I'll go through just 2 or 3 questions, and I'll ask the Director probably to write back to me. So one of the questions really is around, and you touched upon Dale Road, is first page 2.43, which is to continue to review and improve gully maintenance based on reported problem area. This is a high priority, but when you've got the status of it, it is merely to be confirmed. So I'd like you potentially to come back to that. Also in the report it talks very much about the issue on groundwater, because it's easy to look at the surface water issues, as I touched upon a month ago, but our science around identifying the groundwater issues in Croydon is limited, just by the nature of the beast. And in 1.3.3 it's recommended that the Council and partners carry out a detailed study of groundwater presence and flood mechanisms in Croydon, and again this is a high to moderate priority, and that work is not yet to be confirmed. A point I talk about planning, and Paul would probably be interested in this, and I think that this is something that colleagues in many parts of the borough have heard from their residents in areas of flood risk, is around historic and current planning applications being built on potential flood areas. And in 4.13, it talks about data submission criteria for developers submitting applications, and looking about reviewing how we consider flood risk for minor and major developments, and to encourage more sustainable design. So this is something that, again, I'd expect officers, particularly in the planning department probably, to give some serious thought about when we're designing our planning policies. And again, this is something that I think is to be confirmed, and I understand that because it's a complex piece of work. And again, my last point, which is again Dale Road is actually mentioned here, is about investigating the options for future management in Dale Road specifically, and developing a management approach. This is my last question, sorry, Chair, is developing a management approach for protection of the Kenley Waterworks, because you remember those that lived, breathed and suffered those difficult times, that it was the issues around the Kenley treatment works and the vulnerability of that area that potentially meant that there would have been more serious flooding. And there's an action point in there, which is a good action point, and I'd be interested in some weeks perhaps, when you're prepared and ready, to give me a further update, and we could have a one-to-one meeting on that. So, thank you for giving me the time to ask those detailed questions. I very much welcome this piece of work. It is much needed, and it's right that the Council is the legal authority, and I look forward to, yes, in essence, as the GLA member with responsibilities around all of Croydon, but also as a Kenley Ward councillor, continuing to work with you to protect our residents. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for those comments, Stephen, and I take on board your point that around some of those more technical questions, you're happy for a written response, which is fine, but I wonder if I could just get either Cathy or Steve want to comment on the perhaps relatively low level or lower level of response in terms of the public.
I think I'll ask Steve if he's got any comment on that one. I think quite a lot of effort was made in terms of contacting people, and there was an engagement exercise beforehand. And it might also reflect, I mean, if you look at some of the responses as well, you know, quite a lot of the responses were less strategic and were more about individual things. I think usefully one theme was a lot of commenting on concreting over front gardens. That came out quite a lot. But I think quite a lot of effort went into it, but I'll see if Steve or Roland have any further comment on that.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor B. In terms of the consultation process, what's interesting to find is that there were 5 other authorities that have been out for consultation around their flood management plan. And interestingly, Croydon's response rate was second highest to Richmond. Richmond actually had 87 responses, so Croydon was relatively high in comparison. However, I do take the point that when you consider the size of Croydon and the number of responses, there is possibly ways that we could do things better, and I'll take that back and see if we can do something different in the future. Do you want me to talk about some of the particular questions on the technical side, or do you want
No, I think Steve said he's happy for a written answer, and it's we've got a way to go with the agenda, so I'm sure the two of you can have an exchange of I was going to say letters, but I'm sure it'll be emails. Councillor Stephen Mann.
Thank you, Leader, and I'd like to really much thank officers for this report. I know I've been in the area quite a bit about flooding in Ashburton and Addiscombe, and I know this historically has taken a backseat, and obviously with events in Kenley taking priority, actually rightly so in recent years, because we need to get that sorted first. But actually I'm really pleased to see that we as an authority are starting to take those watercourses in the east of the borough seriously. So you can just tell for yourself with road names like Spring Lane, etc., the amount of watercourses that we do have in the Addiscombe and Ashburton area, with the hilly terrain and with more concreted front gardens happening by the month, forcing a greater speed of runoff down those hills. Flooding is becoming worse in the area, and I'm really pleased that your team are looking at it, and I hope we can see some serious measures coming in the future to try and prevent this moving forward. But thank you very much, all.
Thank you, Stephen, for those. Well, I think we'll take those as comments, and Steve will very much take those on board, as I know Councillor Cathy B will as well. Can we agree the report? Thank you very much indeed. If we could now move on to agenda item 10, the boundary amendments to the Church Road and Harold Road conservation area. This is here as a paper to clarify the position in terms of what's already been discussed. The Cabinet happy to agree the paper? Any questions? We're happy to agree the paper. Thank you very much indeed. That's agreed. Moving on to agenda item 11, stage 1 recommendations from the Streets and Environment Scrutiny Subcommittee of the 29th of September 2015. Delighted to welcome the Chair of Scrutiny, Sean.
Thank you, Leader. I just asked people to have a read of the Appendix B on page 125. The meeting did look at 3 sort of main issues. One about the Brighton Main Line upgrade, and as Croydon is a railway town, what's been going on that has had an impact in the last couple of years, and but more importantly could have a very positive impact in the future. And there is a set of recommendations a bit further on page 128, and I do hope that when we do get the response back that the Cabinet and the Council is fully behind the idea of a new East Croydon station, just slightly further north than where it currently is. I would also bring to the attention the closure of East Croydon, south of East Croydon, for 10 days over Christmas and New Year. There's no direct recommendation to Cabinet, but I do urge the Cabinet member responsible to make certain that Network Rail and Southern Rail do take their responsibility seriously, and we avoid problems that's happened over previous Christmas closures across London, where commuters have had very poor service, particularly normally when the service is supposed to resume. And finally, we did have a very good Q&A session with the Cabinet member, and again I would urge people to have a read through that, because there are conclusions in there, not maybe so much recommendations, about how we can improve services, particularly in transport and streets across Croydon.
Thank you, Sean. And on a day when the commuters from Croydon have seen another day of chaos at East Croydon Station, the need for some urgent changes is upon us. So it's fine, Network Rail, talking to you, myself and colleagues opposite and others about, exciting 10, 15, 30-year plans. But I think increasingly the people of Croydon want to know from Network Rail, Southern Trains and others precisely what might be happening in the next 1 to 3 months to improve some of these services in the short term. And we'll certainly, we'll be writing to them after today's events, inviting them to come and share their views about how we might see a better future in the short term. In terms of the longer term, clearly with all the growth we're seeing, much of it, as I said at the start of this, very exciting in terms of a change in Croydon, but we are going to need to see significant infrastructure investment and growth, and a new station, is an absolute must. And again, we need to make sure we lobby for that to be sooner rather than later. It's a purely personal view, but left to me, it might be called Croydon International and not East Croydon, but that's a debate, I'm sure, for another day. I know my colleague started something of a debate when he tried to rename Norwood Junction, but so you've got to be careful with this stuff. But so it is a purely personal view. Anyone else on this paper? No. Can we agree then the paper or the position put to us and move on to the next agenda item? And we have a succession of important papers and contracts and other bits and pieces here. But Councillor Hall, if I could take 12.1 to 12.4 through you, and probably just invite any comments or questions at this stage. But Simon.
Thank you, Chair. This is a standard report. Just in terms of the separate reports to highlight it, the work we've been doing on facilities management has shown the dividends it's paying, because by taking this out of the old interserve arrangements and going for the structures that we've done, we're seeing a 25% saving in the expenditure in this area, at the same time as we're now ensuring that all the cleaning services staff are going to be paid the London Living Wage. So it's, we've been able to save money and also ensure that the staff delivering that service are paid a proper wage. And in terms of health visiting and school-age nursing, that's reinforcing our partnership with Croydon Health Services to deliver these important services. So happy to take questions.
Jason.
Thank you, Leader. Could I ask what the split in terms of funding for the facilities management contract is between the general fund and the HRA in terms of the 1.57 annual cost, and also how the efficiencies split between the two was calculated?
Are we, Richard, in a position to answer that one this evening?
So in terms of the cleaning element for the HRA, it was mainly around window cleaning. So it's quite, in terms of split, it's quite specific on a building by building basis and a spec basis. There's no apportionment in there. It's a very clear split on HRA properties and general fund properties. So the saving was easy to calculate because the bidder put their proposals together based on those properties. I can come back to you on the exact amount, but in terms of the split, but the HRA element's kind of 15-20% of the total. So it's a really significant saving for the HRA in percentage terms, but I'll confirm the exact split to you in a written response.
Thank you, Jason. If there's no other questions, can we agree the papers? Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. I think there has to technically be a motion. Can we agree the motion to move to Part B? Is that agreed? Thank you very much for that, colleagues. I think that ends the webcasting, so thank you very much to all of those of you who've been watching, including you, Gareth, and we'll move into Part B.